let's start it. Let's kick it off, my man.
All right. Well, listen, let's welcome to the FANCENTRIC podcast series. Great group here today to look at emergency preparedness. Are you and your venue prepared for any type of crisis, etc.? This podcast, my co-host, Jim Mercurio, distinguished fellow for IIFX. So, Jim, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much, Lou. I appreciate seeing you, and can't wait to kick this off with some of the titans of the industry, as I'd like to call it. I have had the pleasure to work with most, if not all of them. But why don't we start? With you, Lindsay, to kind of tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do, and we'll kick it around the table. Just go clockwise, if you don't mind, and then I'll kick it back to you, Lou. We'll talk a little bit more about some of the major points and questions that we want the audience to kind of understand why we're here today. Go ahead, Lindsay. How are you?
Hi, Jim. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Lou. Hi, everyone. My name is Lindsay Gietzen, and I am the Program Director for the Doctor of Medical Science and Doctor of Health Science programs at University of the Pacific. Clinically, I practiced as a PA in Detroit in emergency and trauma medicine. That was my specialty. And I am currently working with the American Council on Education as a subject matter expert for all medical training for Army, Navy, Air Force, and Coast Guard. So very glad to be here today. Thank you for having me.
It's fantastic. Darcy, you're up.
Hey, good morning, everybody. My name is DARCY LEUTZINGER. I spent 27 years in law enforcement here in Metro Detroit. I'm currently the security director for Matt Ishbiel, who owns the United Wholesale Mortgage in Phoenix Suns. We're located in Pontiac, Michigan, just outside of Detroit. And I'm also the co-president with Lindsay for Premier Training Systems.
John, take it away.
Good morning. John Petrona, recovering litigator attorney. 30 years that got smart and came into a situation where we could help people with regard to risk and emergency preparedness. Founder and senior managing director at Patron Risk. And we work with corporate America, major sporting facilities and leagues throughout the country with regard to documentation and planning, with regard to training, with regard to resilience, and a thing called Safety Act acknowledgement with regard to safety and protection of facilities throughout the country.
Appreciate it, John. And certainly one of my friends, not the least of which is last on the list, but Till, it's great to see you. Thanks for joining us. Give us a little about your background and who you are and what you're doing.
Good to see you. Thanks, Jim, and thanks, Lou. I'm Till Jolly. I'm an emergency physician. I'm in Northern Virginia. Practiced for a long time at a couple of big busy hospitals around here, but also have a history in emergency preparedness. Previously, a official in the Department of Homeland Security, planning for the last pandemic, which became planning for this one, and have been pleased to work with a number of you. Worked a number of Super Bowls with Jim and others. And have been very pleased to help IIFX through the last few years in education and training. I'm chief medical officer of a company called Eveshka, which provides a large series of consulting services to a collection of government agencies. Back to you.
Love it. Lou, I'll give it back to you and kind of run us through the program and schedule for today.
The outline for today's meeting. Well, while we're getting that up too, why don't we I want to start it off with John. John, from your perspective as a risk manager, what are you looking for at these venues that might meet your criteria for success?
Well, my criteria for success is the protection of the facility, the protection of the fan, the protection of the employees. So what we normally do as a base is to go in and look at the facility, feet on the ground, because each facility, these are different areas, different time zones, have the same threats, but different threats. So when you put together a major program with regard to security, there has to be a customization to it. And that customization leads to the development of the plans, and thereafter the training on an upper level, mid-level, and then taking that training to the next level. And we'll hear today, I think, more items on how we can take it to the next level and how important it is for there being an all-in in order for these facilities to become safer.
Yeah. Now, how does this relate to the Safety Act? I know I get that a lot here at the Institute.
But I think the most important thing is, and not to belittle Safety Act, because I think Safety Act is very important, is having a strong emergency preparedness program.
Yeah.
And what I learned in doing Safety Act originally was, look, you can't have Safety Act without a strong emergency preparedness program. And the key to some organizations is they don't have the dollars or the funding to take it all the way through Safety Act, but they do have the dollars or the funding to have a document strong system, a system where feet on the ground meets documentation, a system where there's training and testing through tabletops and other items, and there's resiliency in their program. And then at some point in the future, terrorism protection wise, they can go forward with regard to a Safety Act acknowledgement that is what I call as an acknowledgement with a bite, because not only does it create some strong protections, but it also creates a situation where economically there's a benefit to that stadium, that facility, that organization, because they've done things to the best level of security they can to protect the fan.
Well, one more question. Where's the balance with liability now?
The balance with liability. The
In
balance.
other words, they're reducing the potential of liability, actually. Very important aspect of this whole process.
Yeah. Well, I guess what? If you've done things a certain way, or if you've had an EOP and said, that was 3 years old, but we've got an EOP, or you borrowed it from Charlie, who's got a stadium next door or a school district, and said, I'll just use his. Guess what? You've opened the doors to liability, and watch out. More importantly, you're not protecting the folks that you have to protect. There's a difference in your program to other programs based upon your facilities. Is it new old? Is it near an airport? Is it near a waterway? Is it downtown? How is it set up? And those things all become important in the process of developing a strong emergency preparedness program.
Good. Jim?
Hey, Darcy, and maybe Lindsay, I'll throw it to all three of you, but besides, the bigger picture that John talks about with Safety Act and business continuity and all these emergency preparedness plans, which are vitally important, let's talk a little bit about what type of emergencies we're preparing for, right? Is it just the grandiose thing, or are we talking about the types of emergencies that all events or incidents, we'll call them, that all venues and facilities are kind of or should be prepared for? Maybe you could talk a little bit about that, Lindsay, Darcy, and then kind of I'll kick it to you, Till, to talk a little bit about what those types of things are doing and how you're preparing for those types of incidents. You're on mute, Darcy. There you go.
I'll get started. So when we look at training, we want to make sure that we're creating training programs that are tailored toward the adult learner. So we learn differently as we age, and so we want to create training, and I'll let Dr. Jolly talk about what we're training for, but specifically when we create training and we identify these areas that people need to be trained, we want to make sure we have engaging content. We want to make sure that it's quick, that it's economical, and we want to make sure we really focus on empowerment. It's our goal that when we look at a facility that everyone is empowered to respond and to be able to act in an emergency, whatever level that emergency may be, maybe from just calling 911 and knowing how to talk to a dispatcher, and all the way to the advanced level of actually being able to perform skills. So Dr. Jolly, I'll turn it over to you so you can answer the other part of Jim's question about what we're actually teaching.
Yeah, and thanks. And we can make this complicated or we can make it simple. I'm the health person here, so I can't start without talking a little bit about COVID, which is not a COVID talk. You've all heard a lot about COVID, and we've been through a lot the last 3 years, but I think we learned a lot about preparedness, about training, and about how to be flexible. And could something happen again? Sure, but let's kind of go back to before COVID and things that have always been true. We have a saying in medicine that common things are common. And so if you operate a place where there are lots of people, human beings, things are going to happen. And they may be simple things, from slip and falls to heart attacks, to asthma attacks, to cuts and scrapes, to sometimes bigger things that unfortunately also happen in our society, like active shooters or bombings or other things that we don't want to think about, but we know happen and we know we need to be prepared for. And as you're looking at your venue and you just look around at the space, you got a lot of people sometimes in a big space and a certain number of staff. You can't predict which staff are going to be close to that space. You don't have the most highly trained police officer, paramedic, physician, nurse, PA, anybody there necessarily. Everybody who's a member of the staff could be the closest to a small incident or the closest to a large incident. And the outcome of that incident at a personal level and at a venue level may well depend on what that first person does and how they respond. And so that's true in a stadium. It's true in a hospital. It's true out on the street. And so that's why, not everybody needs to be prepared at the level of the highest trained person, but everybody needs a certain level of knowledge of what to do in various situations. And then we think about the bigger things. I have told my colleagues about the last pandemic in 2009, a picture that I saw of an empty soccer stadium, and I was going to warn not to show anybody in the U.S. that, because of course that can never happen here. Well, we saw that here. And so thinking through, don't think this could never happen to me, whether it's something like that, or somebody falling over a railing, or somebody having a heart attack, or a shooting, or some other big thing, either on a field or in the stands. And we could tell all sorts of stories about things that we've seen on television the last few years, dramatic things that we thought would never happen in a stadium, and that have happened. And the outcomes of many of those things are very dependent on who's there first and what do they do. And so that's the Jim.
If I could,
I appreciate
that. What Dr. Jolly said is, what we've done in Premier Training is create solutions for this, right? So what we've taken is the concept of the first responder, and we dial it down to what we call the immediate responder, the person that's probably going to be there while it's happening. All right. And what we want to do is empower every worker at that station, from all lines up to the first responders, with the basic skill set to be a force multiplier for maybe one person going down to a mass casualty incidents, because you're going to need people to help. And you're going to have a lot of those people step up. So we've created a training platform, two-phase. One, from an awareness level of bleeding control, first aid awareness, CPR awareness, even de-escalation communication. And we're giving the masses awareness online training at the basic level, so they have an idea, like Dr. Lindsay said, of what to do. We'll come in later on and develop those skills to a hands-on session, but let's start with this section also. And then another thing we developed, which is the ERT team, is a package where we're training a group of volunteers that are a little higher trained what to do. So that's kind of the concept. We're going to come in from a training platform to help those immediate responders as a force multiplier that assists security, that assists law enforcement and fire on any situation that could potentially happen, the most likely ones at a stadium or venue.
I think the other key component is that these incidents don't necessarily happen. One, you complete it and then there's another incident, right? People need to realize that there are a multitude of things. When Dr. Jolly talks about common, and what's still common is when you have an incident and then you have a crisis on top of that incident, or you have multiple incidents that are getting your resources that are pulling in different directions. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that, Lindsay, about how your training allows for that. You may have a de-escalation issue. You may have a heart attack in section 219, and you may have, something that's a protest that's out in the parking lot that's turned violent. You've got these 2 or 3 things that are happening with 70,000 people in your venue or in on the outside of your venue, and the importance of being able to have, staff trained, ready to go and to respond in many different facets and many different incidents happening throughout the day. Can you talk a little bit about what we should be looking at and how we should be dealing with something like that?
Absolutely. And I'm going to kind of tail on to what Dr. Jolly said about common things are common, and common things are common in stadiums as well as at home or at the grocery store or at the movies. And so by offering this training and having everyone at the stadium trained, you're not just training them for what they might encounter at work, but what they might encounter in any everyday event. And so it's really a value that you're providing to those who are staffing your venue to show that you really care about them and their well-being, not just at work, but at home too. When you talk about,
as I'm sorry to cut you off, but venue operators are always torn between how do I make that decision? I only have X amount of budget. Where best do I put this in? And then John, maybe kind of talk about how we can't not take that risk, right?
It's interesting. I love Lindsay and the words that came out, and Darcy and Dr. Jolly. It's keep it simple and awareness. And we always want to I'm going to take a tabletop, for instance. Let's have a bomb threat, and then there's something in the parking lot with a shooter, and then somebody got kidnapped. Well, what about the deep fryer blowing up in one of the concessions? So that you got to close a gate. You can't use that concession. People got to be moved to different areas. And by the way, you're training people on basic, simple things that are so important because other disasters could lead to that. And you're making them comfortable then, maybe to go to the next level of training so they will actually partake in a training when you have an active shooter or you have a major problem out there. We've got to start at that level. We can't start at this level.
Darcy, I'm sorry, go ahead, Lindsay. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, sometimes people will say, well, who should be trained at the venue, right? Should it just be the security officers? Should it just be those in concessions? Should it just be those at the tickets? I don't know, where are you going to have your heart attack today? That's kind of the question to consider. Like, this could be you. This could be your family who's here at the event. And so I want everyone to be prepared. I want everyone to know the basic skills. And of course, budget is always going to be an issue. And I see what a lot of these courses cost, and you can get certification upon certification. But let's start somewhere. Let's start with the awareness. Let's let everybody have access to these courses. They're affordable, they're economical, they're very time efficient. Someone can do these on the subway on the way to work easily. These courses are about 15, 20 minutes in length. They're interactive, and they have little videos and things where you're not just scrolling through. There's no PowerPoint. We've really elevated the way that we approach learning, and we want to make it fun. And so if we can give people that little taste of awareness of this is what you might encounter, and this is the one thing, if there's just one thing that you're going to do, this is it. And let's all be accountable for each other, regardless of where we are.
Darcy, that's where I was going, right? I was going to kick to you to talk about, oftentimes it's the full-time staff that gets some of that training. Maybe we'll bring in the supervisory staff. But oftentimes when you're talking about the 2,500 or 30 or 3,000 game day staff, you can only get enough training in. You're talking about bringing this to the frontline staff too, right? This is where the rubber hits the road, right? These are the folks that are likely going to be on point when an incident takes place, right? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, Jen, think about a car accident, for instance. When a car accident happens on the street, paramedics aren't there. Police aren't there. But other cars and people are there. They're your immediate responder. I'll even dial it down with, if I'm on the floor here at a business and somebody has a heart attack or a CPR, and I'll tell somebody, hey, go get the AED. You know what the answer is 90% of the time? Where's the AED?
Where is it? Yeah.
Yeah. So we're building in the awareness that, okay, we're going to tell you where things are in your facility. We're going to build, not only we're going to teach you, but we're going to give you a plan on how to do this. And so what this does is this breeds this confidence throughout the venue that really everybody has. Now that I'm the first responder, if I respond on the scene and I see the AED is already there, or I have a bleeding emergency and they grab the tourniquets and the bleeding control packets and they're already there, we're going to save lives. That's going to be a fantastic benefit to the venue, even from a brand perspective, right? because now they see, and everybody else sees around here, that we've got multiple people responding to anything, and even like a de-escalation on a mental health crisis. We're not there to diagnose the issue, but we know maybe what to say to them to keep the situation calm until somebody else gets there. So, and what John, you hit the nail on the head. Let's start and let's dial this thing down to probably what's going to happen, probably who's going to give there, and then give them the tools that they need to at least get the situation under control until the professionals can get there.
I've had the pleasure of working with you for several Super Bowls, and in my view, you're right up there with the best of the best. And I think when I looked at all the things that you put in place back in the day in early Super Bowls and compare that to the resources that perhaps the NFL, and listen, the NFL does a terrific job, especially at the Super Bowl and these bigger events, and are doing a really good job of trying to get member clubs and teams and venues to emulate what it is that they're doing at the Super Bowl as a normal event, not one that is a SEER-rated event, for example. But can you talk about the importance of what you're seeing in venues today, maintaining kind of the status quo versus innovating in some of the new either technologies or techniques or protocols and procedures that put venues and operators in a better position to succeed, as you would see for any of these larger events? F1 just in Vegas recently, Super Bowl here in Vegas, the World Cup coming to stage in a few years here. Can you talk a little bit about some of those things you're seeing venues do today versus where you may want to see them go in the future?
Yeah, there's no doubt there's a lot of technologies. And if you're a venue operator, you probably get 3 solicitations a day from somebody trying to sell you some, maybe on a good day and maybe worse on a bad day, sell you the technology that's going to solve all your problems and whatever it is. It's food service or emergency preparedness or parking or whatever it is. So there's no doubt there's a lot of technology. So you need to be able to vet all that and not buy everything that's thrown at you. And, I think the things that get put in place are the simple things and sort of predicting the things that are most likely to happen, because those are the things that you're going to most likely need to respond to. Now, there's no doubt, and it hasn't been said yet, but it needs to be said, that venue managers face difficulty now with staffing. We know that. Everybody knows that. I've not run a venue, but you have. And it's a big issue. And so how do you get those people trained in this sort of thing while you also need to train them in routine other operations that aren't preparedness? So to have a system whereby they can be trained simply, remotely, and in bite-sized chunks. The 3-hour, having to sit and watch 3 hours of PowerPoint is, it's how I learned in medical school, but it's not how people learn now.
Thank God for that too, right?
Exactly.
Those days are over, right?
But realizing you can target this, and for something like AEDs, I mean, where they are, if you can find one, it can tell you how to operate itself. Right. So, that is a major advance in public health, to think the way we used to do it and the way it's done now, it actually talks to you and tells you how to do it. But you got to know where it is. That's a simple, how do you find them? Kind of training, or simple bleeding control, or how to, and one of the biggest issues, and Darcy and Lindsay probably have thoughts on this, is how you communicate an emergency. And how you communicate among staff. Where do you go up the chain of command? How do you get to your operations center? How do you get the right people there when you can only do the first part? And that's a key part of training, and that's not that hard, but that can be the most important thing, is clearing the space for whatever is happening and getting the right people there.
Though I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up some of the behavioral issues we're seeing today in society, and it's not just, by the way, in sporting and entertainment events. I mean, you're seeing it on airplanes and theaters, and it's just Till, I mean, you talk about COVID, and maybe some of that is coming out of that isolation for a while, or just the appearance of acceptance that I can behave and act any way I want because I can. Lou, maybe we should talk a little bit about how that's affecting the response, right? When you look at that type of behavior that's springboarded forward to the different types of issues that we're experiencing, and the de-escalation training piece that Darcy and Lindsay talked about on how important that is, so that those types of incidents don't become a major crisis in these events. What are your thoughts there, Lou? They'd be great thoughts, Lou, if you would get off mute, but
Thank you so much.
There you go.
We heard it all morning here. Something is going to happen, and when that behavior happens, I think what we're going to accomplish here with our training is a de-escalation training. We're the only we can control in our stadium's preparedness and preparing our staff to handle those situations. So I think we're on the right track when it comes to that particular course. But I also want to say, while I'm on, is that I think with this entire package, the word preparedness, we can say as an institute that we're providing a platform to prepare all the staff members for success in any type of incident that occurs, that we can really have the capabilities to assist. So, Jim, the behaviors there, we can talk about causes all day, but I think what we're saying here today, if you look at the de-escalation communications course, that's the start, don't you think, Jim?
I do. The cause, I guess the response half the time, it doesn't matter what kind of crisis or incident you're having, most times, it's the response that I think we need to kind of focus on. And the thought leaders of Lindsay and Darcy, for example, in this package, that will give them an opportunity to kind of go through some of the things that they've developed, and hopefully it's something that the stadiums and arenas and venue operators can engage in a hopeful, budget conscious way. And then John, to talk a little bit more about how you take the big picture things of mitigating risk to the ground level. I think that would be a kind of a good way to kind of segue into these folks. But John, if you got any more thoughts a little bit on how you can kind of, I don't want to be disrespectful and dumb it down, so to speak, but you're in this stuff every day. You're dealing with this every day, and sometimes we don't have enough time to kind of get into the thick of things, but it's important that you get them to the frontline staff and to those folks that are operating. Can you talk a little bit about that? And then I'll kick it to you, Lindsay and Darcy, to kind of close out the session with some of the different packages and trainings that hopefully IIFX with your partnership can help the listeners today.
Jim, I so agree with what you're saying. We're coming in on the big picture, and you need the big picture. You need to set the standards. You need to set the place where things are gonna flow. You need to have top level trainings as well as lower level trainings, because that's important too, to make sure that you're working not only within the facility based upon your plans, but you're working with the outside police, fire, EMT, FBI, and everybody's going to communicate when things happen. Communication, consistency, continuity are all important. And having a partner and listening today to Darcy and Lindsay, like Darcy and Lindsay, and at the dollar values that could be discussed later on down the line, it gives you an opportunity to say, hey, we've done this. Now we've got a partner we want to bring in that's going to be able to help us take the big picture, tone it down a little bit, and do the training on the next level, which has to be done solely because there becomes awareness, and then there becomes an opportunity for those folks to participate if there is an issue. And I think that becomes the key here.
I think also, Darcy, there's a great benefit of bringing in a third party, right? I mean, when we look at policies and procedures that are being developed, that are then being vetted by your training, that is in some cases endorsed, certainly here, maybe you could talk a little bit about the value there in terms of the risk mitigation and the expert witness testimony, so to speak, that you can talk to.
Thanks, Jim. So kind of what we do when we come in, and people will have us come in and look at their policies, procedures. We look for gaps. All right. We look for best practices. This is what you can do better in different areas. And that's what I think a lot of outside agencies are looking for, is, they're used to seeing what they think is the right way to do things, but we do this around the country and see it all the time. From a liability standpoint, even from de-escalation, at some point, somebody's going to go hands-on somebody, especially if it's a crisis that's escalating, right? And when it's not if, it's when the civil lawsuits come in, they're going to say, what did you do to de-escalate the situation? What training did you have? This is where that fills that gap, right? I was in law enforcement for 27 years. I testified almost every day on a lot of very serious matters. I've been called in as an expert to testify on different types of force continuum of issues. You have to have a starting point. We didn't go right with punching somebody in the face or tackling somebody and grabbing them on the ground. We tried these techniques that were developed and endorsed and signed off on first. So it's from an escalation standpoint. So what we provide with this training is we also back the training, right? If anything happens, both of us have testified many times in court as experts. We will back these courses that we're giving you with our expert opinion on why we developed it, how, and then we also keep your training records. So when it does come into a situation where you're brought into it, we hold all the training records for everybody because they're going to want to see those also.
I was just going to say, how important is it to document that stuff?
The
how
most
and why, and maybe talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, documentation is everything. Everything has got to be written down because you may not need it tomorrow, but you may need it in 2 years from tomorrow is where they're going to want to see it. And if it isn't written down, it didn't happen. So what happens, what we do is we keep your documents for you. When an expiration date approaches on any of these type of courses, we'll let you know it's time to retake the course or to reevaluate the course. And these courses are always updated for the latest, newest procedures and authorized technology. So these courses will be changing and evolving with the landscape of response over time.
And Lindsay, so how often should you review those policies and procedures? And when you're going through this training, how are team members signing off on this? Are they talk to a little bit about that process and the importance of that process?
So each facility is going to establish their own policies and procedures, as well as how often they need to review those policies and procedures. We recommend at a minimum that they're gone through annually. When we look at these courses that we offer, we recommend that everyone refreshes annually for these courses as well. They're short, they're 20 to 30 minutes in length, and that way you're brushing up on these concepts and skills. So this is not the 4 hours sit in front of a PowerPoint type of course. This is something they can look at on their phone. It's mobile as well. They can do this training right there on their phone. At the end, they get the certificate. Each certificate has a unique number attached to it. And so we, as Darcy mentioned, we keep track of these records as well. We know who's taking the training and when they need to refresh on what they're doing. But again, I would say at least annually is very important. If you're doing skills, if you're not doing them all the time, these skills are easy to forget. So we like to always build in a lot of training activities when we talk about policies and procedures. Go around and at least once a month meet with your team and do a quick refresher of these skills. Let's talk about where the AEDs are. Let's remind everybody. And as far as onboarding goes, that's a huge challenge, or it was a huge challenge, especially if you had to get a company come in to teach CPR, right? 4 hours. Are we going to do this once a month, once every 6 months? What if someone's already been here and we don't have a class? Well, that problem's solved now because they just simply go right onto their phone or onto a laptop. They can do this any time of the day. Courses are completely at the discretion of the venue and at the convenience of the learner.
John, this is pretty, you talked about this earlier with Safety Act. This dovetails perfectly into some of the requirements associated with continuous improvement, I think is how they refer to it. Can you talk a little bit about that? Am I right? Does that dovetail nicely?
You are correct, because obviously with regard to Safety Act, they want to see that all facets of the facility and the organization have some sort of training, and there's documentation. And Jim, you've been through the business, with regard to part-time employees, with regard to guest services. A lot of times the questions come up, what are you doing it? How are you doing it? How do you keep track if these people are actually involved in doing it? And that means taking that vendor who's working with you, that security group who's working with you, that's providing security and or guest services, and getting to that group and saying, okay, we're going to do business with you, but we're going to do business with you under these parameters because we have to do this to keep up our Safety Act. It becomes that asterisk too with regard to Safety Act to put you in a better place for protection. And as a lawyer, Darcy's testified. I don't know if I ever examined you, Darcy, or not. Cross-examination, I don't think so. But you would have done a hell of a job. It's all documentation. And
John,
I think she would say, we do this, this, and this. Or I think Charlie has a document, but he doesn't have it. You can't think. You got to know. You got to have a consistency and continuity as to how you do it, how you put it together, and it's got to be on at least a yearly basis. I say it's got to be more than that.
So, John, I love you and you know it, but I would put my money on Lindsay. I think she'd whoop you. Till you talk about, I've heard you say this a number of times. I say that in jest, my man. You know that.
I know.
Till I've heard you say this a number of times about the importance of being self-sufficient in these events and preparing for the unexpected at the same time. Can you talk a little bit more about that and some of your experiences in terms of, well, you can certainly talk about it, which you had to deal with, we all had to deal with these past couple of years, but beyond that, what does that mean? Be self-sufficient for some time and preparing for the unexpected. Can you dive into that for me?
Yeah, realize that, the way the emergency response system is set up for average life is you call 911 and admittedly somebody's not there within seconds, but there's no extra traffic. There's no extra barrier. Usually there's no extra barriers. The weather's decent and EMS and police and fire and all the right people show up. In a venue, you've changed the landscape just by the nature of having a venue with people in it. And you've got a group of people inside the venue. Hopefully you have included people from outside the venue in first aid or law enforcement and otherwise, so that they are there, because you are erecting unnatural barriers with fencing. You've got extra cars, you've got extra people, and and in a really dire situation, you may have people self-evacuating, making it that much worse. And so one needs to think, I'm not preparing for the Tuesday afternoon when I'm writing my preparedness plan. When I look around the venue and it's empty and the roads are empty, I'm preparing for a Saturday afternoon when the place is packed, maybe it's snowing, and I need to make sure that, one, I can manage things internally with what I have for an extended period of time, because help from outside may be a while getting in just physically. And two, making sure that I've proactively coordinated with the external local resources so they know what's going on in my venue and I know what they have, which means well beforehand, your local law enforcement agency, your local fire department, your local public health agency, frankly, which most people forget, although not now, they're not going to forget. Right. And other things, because you need to understand their capabilities, and they actually need to understand what's going to be there when they get there if they're not there, and hopefully pre-stage people in your venue in an organized way.
Yeah, I think, listen, that's one of the things, Lou, that I prided my side and my staff on for years. I took the approach that prepare as if this was an earthquake, because earlier I would say it doesn't matter what the incident is, but if you took that mindset that there's an earthquake and it doesn't just affect the stadium, it's going to affect the entire city, maybe the region, and so those resources that Till talk about may not be coming. And so that's kind of why I took that approach in terms of providing as much resource as you can in your venue for that self-sufficient stage for quite some time. In many cases, Till, we were in a better advantage. I mean, the time that it would take for EMS, fire, or whatever to respond to an outside, I think the they've got a mandate. It's got to be between 11 or 13 minutes, something to that effect, right? And I think in the stadiums, if you're doing it right, the amount of time that it takes to respond to get to people on scene could be split in half because of the resources that you're talking about, because of the types of things. So I think when you're doing those types of training, just keep that in mind, because I always thought when you talk about being self-sufficient, that was kind of my mindset. And I think that would be something that I would ask listeners today to be mindful of, because it's not just, something you should do because, it's the right thing to do. It's an obligation. It's not only but to me, it's a moral. I think it's a moral obligation as well. You are in the custody of care, as our old friend Russ Simon, and I do emphasize old, would say. And I hope he's listening, because I want to give him a jab there. But he is spot on when you realize that it is your obligation. You have the right, the obligation. You have the responsibility to take care of the guests that are in your venue and in the time of your care. So with that, Lou, I'll turn it back to you. But before we say goodbye, but I just wanted to say my thanks and congratulations to all of you for being titans in the industry, and certainly for the conversation today. Darcy, congratulations on your recent accomplishments. The PhD behind your name just solidifies the true testament of who you are and the hard work and effort you're putting in. So I just want to pay good respects to that. But again, to all of you, Lindsay, John, Teal, thanks again for being leaders in the industry, and thanks for being here today. Lou, I'll kick it back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. What we're saying here today, folks, is that emergency preparedness is a very important element in the fan journey. It's our obligation to make sure that our staffs are trained well and prepared for anything that might occur. And as you look at the objectives of our podcast here today, let's just review them quickly. Today's world demands more than the status quo. As we look at the future, how do we train better quality training, etc.? And that's what we're trying to do here at the Institute. Well-trained staff is certainly a confident force multiplier. Awareness training turns your staff into immediate responders. And that is very critical change that we're making from the status quo. Having everyone in the staff trained on the front line for awareness is critical for the future of our industry. And with awareness, your staff learns they can do more than they have in the past, and they're prepared to do it and feel confident. And as John talked about, assure compliance with whether it's the Safety Act, etc., reducing the potential liability, protecting the brand, build and retain your team is critical, and the well-trained emergency response team. So, Darcy, I want to turn it over to you before we wrap up, and talking about the response team and what kind of special offer we can offer our viewers today.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Lou. So the concept that we've developed of this ERT, and I do at the facility I'm at, I've got 200 people on this ERT, is give them, and they're volunteers that are asked, that are positioned in different parts of the campus. And these are the people that come to you because they want to be there. They've got a very great interest in helping out and being part of a team if there's an emergency that can help security. I was amazed at how many people want to do this in the facility. So we train them in all the things that you see up on the board: bleeding control, first aid, CPR, de-escalation. We train them in active shooter. And we had a building evacuation not too long ago where we got 10,000 people out of a building over 1 million square feet of campus in 8 minutes. Unbelievable. It's all done safely with no injury to anybody, out to the area that they were supposed to be in. We gave the all clear, brought them back in. That's what helps. That's your security officer and team can't do that. So creating this ERT team is an amazing concept that we've developed that we can help you with. For what we're going to do for everybody in IIFX is, for the month of December, we're going to give that to you for free. Okay, that's going to be a free concept where we will give you not only the idea of the policy and procedure, but we're also going to give you the written policy and procedure that you can use if it fits your facility, and then also 30 minutes with me and Lindsay to discuss how that would adapt to your specific facility. And that is all for free. The code is going to be HOLIDAY. We'll show that in 1 second. Emergency response team right there. But these regular courses, you've seen the pricing on them. All IIFX members get 30% off those all the time. And then if you've got a large facility and you need a certain number of people trained, we're even going to give better discounts and more discounts. And we'll work with Dr. Lou on what those would be. But we want to bring these courses to the people. We call it bringing training to the people. We want to be everybody confident. We want them to be happy to train and to get excited again about being a part of a solution.
Darcy, thank you for that generous offer. And like Jim, thank you. And I think all of you on all our panelists here today to really provide a new entity and training for our stadiums and arenas and festivals, etc. So John, thank you. And Dr. Jolly, thank you. Darcy, thank you. Lindsay and Jim. Have a great afternoon, folks.
Thanks, Lou. Have a good holiday, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.